Welcome to the Lions Den Academy, everyone. In this video here, we will be finishing our series on the Beatitudes, which is, I believe, part 12 of our series on the book of Matthew. If you happen to be brand new here, I will link the entire playlist to that at the end of this video. But basically what we do here is we unpack the Bible verse by verse. We're starting with the book of Matthew and bring it to you in hopefully an insightful and enlightening and engaging way for you. So with that being said, let's dive right in. So let's dive into the first bit of scripture for today, which is found in Matthew chapter 5, verse 8, which goes, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." So here in this Beatitude, we're going to come to pretty much the core focus of the majority of Jesus' teaching, which is that he truly cares about your heart and the contents of it. And I can tell you, trying to abide in the rest of Jesus' teachings is going to feel extremely exhaustive and like a never-ending, battle to try to check all the check boxes and all that kind of stuff. If you're not, just changing your heart. And I think, the best, verse that truly illustrates that point, which is one of my favorites just because it shows the two different ways that you can view your approach to God, is John 14:15, which reads, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." Right, and you can clearly see that there's two different ways that you can view that passage. One, making it like an obligatory thing that you have to do, saying that, hey, if you love me, you better keep my commandments. But that's really not, the way it's intended to be read. Instead, it's, well, if you love me, of course you're going to keep my commandments. It's just like, hey, you love your wife, right? So that means it should just come natural to you to stay faithful to her and, to honor her and cherish her, and do everything that you should as a husband. It shouldn't feel like obligatory and like, it's, just these check boxes that you have to do just to stay married. So in the ancient Greek, the phrase pure of heart has this idea of straightness, honesty, and clarity. And there's really two core ideas connected to this when it comes to this passage, which is, having a single and undivided heart in devotion and commitment to God. And secondly, having inner moral purity compared to the image of purity or ceremonial purity as the Pharisees and Sadducees would have. And we can see that it's clearly not enough to simply clean up our act on the outside, as we come later in Matthew, which is in chapter 23, verses 25 to 26, where Jesus says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee. First, clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside may also be clean." So the heart here is fully critical and crucial to Jesus. What we think about and care about in the deep, dark recesses of our lives is what he cares about most. And there's actually quite a few other verses that fully illustrate this as well that I'd like to share. The first one is in 1 Samuel 16:7. Which says, "For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." And then we're going to come to later in Matthew, one in chapter 12, verses 33 to 34, which says, "Either make the tree good and its fruit good, or the tree bad and its fruit bad, for the tree is known by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." And then later in Matthew, in chapter 15, verses 18 to 19, he says, "But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, and slander." All right, so what's the promise here for the pure in heart? It's that for they shall see God. So in this, the pure of heart are going to receive the most wonderful reward. They get to enjoy greater intimacy with God than you could ever have imagined. But if you are, fairly familiar with your Bible, you might be saying, but wait, in John, in chapter 1:18, he says, "No man has seen God at any time." And then Paul's actually going to confirm this verdict later when he says, well, whom no man has seen nor can see, in 1 Timothy 6:16. And Moses as well. He's going to insist that it's no way possible for the human mind to come close to God, where he says that all power of the apprehending God is beyond us, when he says it's not possible for anyone to see God and live, in Exodus 33:20. So there's really two key distinct ideas contained in the promise of seeing God. The first is truly knowing the nature of him who is totally above us. And the second is being close with God through the purity of our lives. So to take just kind of a material example of this, and pure heart, and just actually seeing the beauty of God. So if you've ever been hungover, right, and you got the bloodshot eyes, and you woke up and it's a beautiful day out. The sun's gonna just it's not gonna be a joyful thing for you, right? You're gonna want to shut it out and get as far away from it as you possibly can. But if you have healthy eyes because you have a healthy heart, and living a healthy life, then waking up and seeing that sunrise and the beauty of the landscape and God's creation is going to be a totally different experience for you. Ultimately, this intimate relationship with God, it must become our greatest motivation for purity, greater than a fear of getting caught, or fear of consequences for not being pure in heart. All right, so now we come to our next bit of scripture, which is verse 9, which says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." So this does not describe people who live in peace, but those who actually bring about peace by taking action. It's fairly simple and easy to be a peaceful person, at least for most of us. There might be some of you that might teeter on the edge of being quick to anger, and rushing into a situation might only escalate it and add fuel to the fire. And if that's where you're at, then maybe you just work on the whole meekness step first before work on trying to become more of a peacemaker. Or you might be on the other end of the spectrum and do anything and everything in your power to avoid conflict. If you're in that category, you're probably the type of person that would order a medium rare steak and get a hockey puck well done steak, or maybe even a chicken sandwich instead, and not say anything about it. And by all means, while that's something that you should speak up about, it definitely should be done with extreme respect and kindness and understanding. No one should be yelling at that wait staff. A peacemaker is not an angry person or someone that's going to seek out conflict, or when presented with conflict, they're going to lose his or her cool. And it's also someone who isn't passive and who refuses to stand up for themselves, or let alone anyone else. So what is a peacemaker then? Well, I personally think probably one of the best analogies of a peacemaker is a sheepdog. So if you're at all familiar with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, he wrote 2 different books that he's famous for, On Killing and On Combat. And in it, he describes that the world is essentially broken down into 3 different categories. About 99% of the people are sheep, 1% are wolves, and 1% are sheepdogs. So basically, if you have no capacity for violence, and you're just a healthy, productive citizen, then you would be a sheep. If you have a capacity for violence and no empathy for your fellow citizens, then you have essentially an aggressive sociopath, which would be considered a wolf. But if you have capacity for violence, but also a deep love for your fellow citizens, then you would be considered a sheepdog, a warrior, someone taking a hero's path. This is actually highlighted recently in the movie American Sniper about Chris Kyle. So I'll just play a brief clip of that now.
There are 3 types of people in this world: sheep, wolves, and sheepdogs. Now, some people prefer to believe that evil doesn't exist in the world, and that if ever darkened their doorstep, they wouldn't know how to protect themselves. Those are the sheep. And then you got predators. They use violence to prey on the weak. They're the wolves. And then there are those who've been blessed with the gift of aggression. and the overpowering need to protect the flock. These men are the rare breed who live to confront the wolf. They are the sheepdog.
So a sheepdog serves to protect its flock, even at the cost of laying down its own life. And additionally, they also, herd the flock away from danger, as we should by, teaching the truth of the word to our flock. But being the sheepdog is not as simple as just, simply saying, well, gee, I'm going to be a sheepdog today. The price is going to be, continuous vigilance, consistent and constant training, and the desire to run towards a crisis when others run away. It means boldly speaking the truth, even when people don't want to hear it. And it also means acknowledging that truth is truth. Truth is never going to be relative. The word of God, it never changes. We also, commonly tend to think of this peacemaking work as, being the job of one person, standing between, two different parties.
Oh, I'll tell you what I'm gonna do about it. We don't want to do this today. Ooh, yeah. Yeah, what you lucky my friend's holding me. You lucky, because I'll tear your head off. Don't hold me back, dog. Don't hold me back. Oh, okay. Then go for it.
And this is definitely one way that being a peacemaker is being fulfilled. However, this also applies when, the peacemaker is you and you are the party of being in conflict yourself, whether you're the person that received injury or the person that caused an offense. So if we've been the ones to suffer injury ourselves, then we need to be quick to forgive. And there's so much to unpack when it comes to forgiveness, and we're going to be coming up to that relatively quick when we get into chapter 6. So I'm going to save a lot of that for then. But forgiveness, it doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean that you're wrong and they're right. It also doesn't necessarily mean that you should continue to put yourself in a position to let that insult happen over and over again. And instead, you're going to be making the decision, and it is a decision, although in some cases it might be, the hardest decision that you make. But in that case, actions are going to precede feelings. But basically, it's the decision to no longer let that offense, have any power or control over you any longer, and instead you're going to give that to God. On the other hand, if we've been the ones that have caused any offense, then we actually need to be quick to make peace. Later in this chapter, Jesus even tells us that, if we go to make an offering, at the church, at the temple, and then we remember and realize that, hey, things aren't so hot right now between me and my brother, and we didn't leave on such a good note, then basically you need to take your offering, put it back in your pocket, go make things right at home with your brother, and then you can come back and leave your offering then. And then the promise of peacemakers is that you're going to get to be called sons of gods. So you're going to be recognized as true children of God. They're going to share, his passion for peace and reconciliation and breaking down, walls that divide people. And I do want to make a quick note. I know it says you're going to be called sons of God, and some people can be like, well, what about women? Well, really, what he's saying is that whether you are a man or a woman, you will have all the, inherent, rights and privileges that being a, son, in that culture would have by, following along with this premise. It doesn't mean that, your gender is going to change or anything like that. But instead, it's saying that, the rights and stuff that would normally come to, sons in that time would be bequeathed upon you as well. All right, and now we come to the last bit of scripture that we'll be discussing today, which is verses 10 through 12, which goes, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." So the first thing that we need to notice about this passage is that it's specifically talking about when you are persecuted for righteousness' sake and for Jesus' sake, not for your own. So in verse 10, they're persecuted for righteousness' sake. Verse 11, they are persecuted for the sake of Jesus. So this shows that Jesus expected that their righteous lives would be lived after his example to honor him. Now, it didn't take very long for these words of Jesus to ring true to his followers. Early Christians heard many enemies say all sorts of evil things and falsely accuse them for his sake. Pretty much from the inception, Christianity faced opposition. Its main founder was killed. Its major missionaries were martyred. But as Christianity spread beyond Judea, the nature of the criticisms changed. Rather than simply opposing Jesus' teaching, most attacks against Christianity arose out of ignorance and fear. So some of those were, deadly superstition. In the book Lives of the Caesars, Suetonius, who was a Roman writer, he was actually one of the first pagan writers to mention Christianity. He definitely didn't give a raving review. But instead he called Christians a class of men given to a new and mischievous superstition. This charge of superstition was perhaps the most serious and most common pagan accusation. They were also accused of cannibalism. It's probably not the first thing that you would think about when you think of Christianity, but when the Romans heard that there were Christians were eating the flesh of Christ and drinking his blood, they actually thought that they were actually conducting real cannibalism, until of course they were showed that it's actually just wine and bread and that it's simply symbolic. They were accused of incest. And this one might shock you, but when non-Christians overheard Christians calling one another brother and sister and professing their love for one another, they actually interpreted that as lustful and immoral behavior. They were accused of dismantling families, and that one kind of rang true. A lot of times, a person would, convert to Christianity and then simply leave their family behind if, the family wouldn't convert to follow Christ as well. But instead of being viewed as someone that was simply following the teaching of Jesus, it was instead viewed as, Christianity is basically breaking up families here. And they were also viewed as unpatriotic. During the start of Christianity, there was no separation of church and state, and pretty much all of these civic festivals and holidays, they were religious in nature, but to the pagan Roman gods. And so when Christians they refused to take part in these because doing so would be idolatry, they were viewed as unpatriotic. So that being said, it says to rejoice and be exceedingly glad. So literally, we could translate this phrase to say that the persecuted should leap for joy. And why is that? Well, the persecuted are going to have a great reward in heaven, and because they're also in great company because the prophets before them were persecuted as well. So, God, he absolutely loves it when we proclaim our love and faith in him and stand upon the word. I'm sure most of you have gotten to experience at some point someone taking a stand for you, having your back, even when you didn't expect them to or ask them to. And that might be at work, it might be a friend coming to your defense, or maybe even a complete stranger seeing someone do you wrong and confronting the person for you. There's nothing quite like that. So I'll even take that one step further for those of you that have kids. How cool is it when your kids are praising you up, and talking about how great you are and doing everything in their power to convince another kid of that fact. Now, usually when it comes to kids, they tend to focus on the wrong things, and it's, well, my dad can beat up your dad and all that. But still, that's, just how God views it is, we're his children and we're standing up for him and, proclaiming his truth to the word. And I really do think that God just looks down upon us with the biggest smile, ever, when we're publicly proclaiming that he is the Lord, even despite the fact that, we're most likely going to be met with prosecution. All right, so I do just want to, kind of take a second here to summarize the entirety of the Beatitudes in this three-part series that we've, explored here together. So in summary, the inner happiness spoken of the Beatitudes, it's God's gifts of blessings granted to those of us that decide to be disciples for him. The character traits, though, they're not something that's necessarily, valued or, praised in our modern culture. We don't really give out awards for, most pure in heart or, most poor in spirit or anything like that. And to kind of put a twist on a sermon from Stephen Furtick, well, I've definitely had people, comment to me results from the gym that I've had. No one's really ever come up to me and been like, bro, your meekness lately, that's gains, right? No, but even though it's not something that the world, truly cares about, it's what God truly cares about, and that's ultimately, the person that we should be trying to please the most. And one, other interesting point that I did want to bring up is that, every beatitude here, Jesus is giving the blessing in a present sense. So it's a sense of happiness and contentment that can be enjoyed and delighted in now. It's not, blessed shall be, it's blessed are. So with that being said, in the next videos to come, we are going to be diving further into the Sermon on the Mount series here. And, the Beatitudes here is more like an introduction to that. And there's going to be so much awesome stuff that we're going to be unpacking with that. I do want to let you know that, we do have some other videos coming out that I'm pretty excited in that are not going to be verse by verse, although we will always be continuing that, and that will be the main core focus of this channel. But I've got a testimony video coming out soon, and then also another video where we're going to be doing like top 10 Christian movies and stuff like that. So that being said, I look forward for seeing you next time. If you enjoyed this, make sure you give it a like below so that we can help get this message out to as many people as possible, and since that helps the YouTube algorithm to do so. But that being said, until next time, have a blessed day.